Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi, and I'm coming to you from my reading life to do a May reading wrap-up. I read 9 books in the month of May, which I'm pretty pleased with. I've got my book journal here, and with all the things that I read during the month of May, and so let's just get to it. The very first thing that I completed was The Stranger in the Woods. The Extraordinary Story of the Last True Hermit by Michael Finkel. Michael Finkel is a journalist, and he got fascinated by this story of Christopher Knight, who was 20 years old in 1986 when he left his job and his apartment and his life in Massachusetts, drove up into Maine, and just abandoned his car and walked away from the world. And it was 27 years before he was actually captured arrested by some law enforcement officers breaking into a cabin in the area where he had been hiding out for all these many years, unbeknownst to anyone. It was a fascinating story, but why would somebody want to leave the world and not communicate with anyone for that length of time? I actually read this out loud to my husband during a long road trip, and we both very much enjoyed it. In fact, this book set my husband off, who is a non-reader, into listening to audiobooks, and he's since listened to 2 full, almost a third full audiobooks since we completed this book. So if you have a reluctant reader around you who's interested in sort of adventure stories and how somebody could live in the woods for 27 years and not encounter any other humans, I would recommend this book. The second thing I completed was The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee. This is around 500 pages, and it's a biography of cancer from ancient times, ancient Roman times, all the way up through present day, and details, how medicine, or how doctors and people who knew about medicine treated cancer from the earliest times all the way up until now, how technology has changed, how our understanding of the disease has changed. It was very, very interesting. It was written in a way that compelled you to continue to read. It wasn't dry in any way. Cancer is not something that I would think of as a topic that I would particularly like to spend a lot of time with, but Mukherjee really makes it interesting and compelling. There's a lot of characters around, folks who were drivers, especially in the United States, and pushing for research and development to help develop medicines for cancer. And those folks are fascinating, and they play into this story. And then just the technology of how things like chemotherapy and radiation were developed, and how we figured out what works and what doesn't work. I learned a lot from this book, and I really got a lot out of it, so I would highly recommend it. The third thing I read in the past month was a mystery called The Girls She Left Behind by Sarah Graves. Sarah Graves is a Maine author, and The Girls She Left Behind is the second book in the Lizzie Snow mystery series. Lizzie Snow was a detective in Massachusetts and leaves her very productive and successful police career to go work as a sheriff's deputy in the northern Maine woods due to some family issues and some demons from her past that she's trying to deal with. And it's I would not say that it's particularly, what's the word? It's not like a very, it would be more of like a cozy, although it's not really, I wouldn't call it like a cozy, but it's not a hard-boiled police procedural or detective story either, somewhere in the middle. This particular mystery did have some kidnapping and abuse that might be a problem for some folks, but I enjoy the main setting. I enjoy the rural Maine characters who are very recognizable to me, not as individuals, but just as character types. And I would recommend anybody that's interested in mystery series set in Maine to try this Lizzie Snow series, which takes place in northern Maine, or Sarah Graves' other long-running mystery series, about Home Repairs Homicide is the series name, and it takes place in Eastport, and is a woman who's left the stock market world in New York City to move to Maine and repair her old house and solve mysteries in a tiny little town. Those are very fun as well. The next book I completed was an ebook, They Can't Kill Us All by Wesley Lowery, another journalist written nonfiction about the Black Lives Matter movement. Lowery details what happened in Ferguson with a white policeman shooting a young black man, and then the events that take place around that with protesting and why folks are protesting, and what is the history of Ferguson that led people to that, to be so frustrated with the system, and the system to be so broken and not working for people that they, would take to the streets to protest and to try to bring some justice to their town. And the book also talks about similar things that happen in Baltimore, and it brings in some of the other cases of police violence against black citizens. And I found it to be heartbreaking and very important, and I would highly recommend that anyone read it. I think it does a great job of explaining how the Black Lives Matter movement began, and what it is and what it isn't. So that was very, very good book. The next book I read was my only 5-star read of the month, and that was American Housewife by Helen Ellis. This short story collection knocked my socks off. I am not a particularly huge short story fan. I struggle to find short story collections that I enjoy. This one I loved. You're always going to have, short stories in a collection that you enjoy more than others, but I just love the voice throughout this collection. It's, witty, snarky, very female-oriented. Talks, the themes and the points that Alice is making are very pointed about a woman's role in culture in the United States, and feminism, and I just loved it. I just think that Helen Ellis is an excellent writer, and I would love to read anything else that she writes, but also if anybody has any recommendations for snarky and funny and sort of dark humor, feminist-leaning short story collections, please leave them down below in the comments, because I would love to read some more like this. The next thing I completed was the worst book that I read this month, and that is Am I Alone Here? Notes on Living to Read and Reading to Live by Peter Orner. This is a collection of essays. I thought it was going to be more meditations on the books that Orner read in his lifetime and what those books were about and how they intersected with his life. And I just couldn't connect with this. I found the author to be pretentious, and all of the books that he's talking about are sort of Western canon, dead white dude stuff, and I just could not connect. I felt like he was a bit of a whiny pants, and it just wasn't for me, so I cannot recommend this one. The next thing I completed was an audiobook, and it was actually a reread for me. A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. I love Bill Bryson. Everything that I've read of his has been excellent, and this one did not disappoint on a re-listen to it. It is the story of Bryson walking the Appalachian Trail with his friend Katz from high school, neither one of whom are experienced wilderness hikers, neither one of whom have done any long-range hiking, and they are singularly unprepared for the experience of hiking the Appalachian Trail. I love how Bryson pulls in things about the history of the Appalachian Trail and the Park Service and conservation and forestry in the United States, observations about how other countries deal with protecting places for people to go and walk in the wild, and how we do it in the United States in comparison. Excellent book, very funny. Bill Bryson is also a grumpy old man, but he's a humorous grumpy old man. So I definitely recommend that you try A Walk in the Woods, and I can highly recommend the audiobook experience. The next thing I completed was The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, winner of the Pulitzer Prize and I believe the National Book Award. I mean, it's been, just praised all over the place, and I agree with all of that praise. It's an excellent historical fiction about a young slave woman who escapes from her plantation on an actual underground railroad, a physical railroad. But the physical railroad is the only sort of fantasy aspect of the story. The rest of it is brutal historical fiction about what it was like in the slave South in the United States at that time period. The characters were excellent. The only quibble I had was at the end, the last portion of the book. A whole bunch of new characters got thrown in, and I admit that I did get a little confused at that point. But I still found the narrative very compelling and propulsive. It was very well written. It was my first Colson Whitehead book, but it certainly will not be my last. And I would encourage anybody to try The Underground Railroad. It was only 290 pages, so it's not a huge commitment. And I think that it's really worth your time. The last thing that I completed in the month of May was another audiobook, and it was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This is my first Agatha Christie on audio, but I don't believe it'll be my last. I really, really enjoyed it. The narrator, whose name I am blanking on right now, I think is an actor from the Downton Abbey TV show, and he did a fantastic job with all the different voices. And Then There Were None is sort of at a locked room mystery. I think it's one of the original ones, where 10 people get invited to a house party on this remote island, and they get there, they don't know each other, and then they start being murdered one by one, and the rest are trying to frantically figure out what is going on, who's murdering who, why people are being murdered. It was not long, but it was very good. It was very entertaining. I did not figure out the mystery. And I props to you if you figured it out, but I didn't figure it out. So that was enjoyable. And I am looking forward to trying something else by Agatha Christie on audio in the future. So that's my reading for the month of May, and I hope that next month is just as successful for me, and I hope that you had a great reading month in May, and that next month is good for you as well. Have a great one.